Okay, we're live now.
So welcome to Westminster Energy Joint Committee meeting. Can I start then with the agenda? Item 1 is apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from councillors Lee Carter, Liz Harvey, Adam Kent and Ed Potter.
Okay. Moving to item 2, minutes of the last meeting. Are we happy to receive and approve them?
Agreed, Chairman.
Seconded. Yeah. Item 3, public questions. I understand that no public questions have been received.
No.
Item 4, disclosable interests. Members are reminded that they must declare any disclosable pecuniary interests. If you haven't already done so, but summarise during the meeting, please. So moving on to, should we take items 6 and 7 next, if I may. We'll take those together. Over to you, James.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just give a very brief introduction to the statement of accounts for 21-22 and the annual government statement. So the annual accounts have been produced and are attached to the paper at Appendix 2. That statement of accounts this year includes the trading over the year for Westminster Energy, which has been a quite difficult trading year given the changes in the energy market. The major impacts that are shown within the income and expenditure account, however, is the difference between 2021 and 21-22. Members will recall that in 2021 the pension liability was removed from Westminster Energy and moved into the Westminster Supplies Pensions Joint Committee. And therefore that had a huge impact on the income expenditure account in 2021. 21-22 represents a difficult trading year, but nevertheless produced a surplus at the end of the year. The cash flow statement, balance sheet and narrative report are all included within the accounts, and I'm happy to take any questions on those as necessary. Also attached as an appendix is the annual governance statement for the financial year. This is an important document that demonstrates the overall governance across the organisation and ensures that the accounts have been pulled together in an appropriate way and that all checks and balances and appropriate approaches are undertaken within the organisation. Also attached is the letter of representation, which will be signed and sent to the auditors to confirm the arrangements for Westminster Energy. That's an introduction to the accounts. So it's up to you, Chair, whether you want to take questions on that or whether you want to go straight over to John to go through his side on the external audit findings report and then take questions at the end.
Actually, I think I'd go to them separately, thinking
Okay.
about it. Do I have any questions from folks not in the room? No, I can see the answer. No, anything to anything? Okay, so we could move the recommendations at point 2, A to C. Are you happy to agree and note those?
Agreed, Chairman.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Lovely. So moving on to item 7, as having said we'll take it together. There we go. So item 7 is external audit findings report.
Okay, thank you. So yes, item 7, our external audit report starts on page 67 of the pack and is a summary of our audit findings on the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2022. The pack that's included for you is actually a working document that we use throughout the course of the audit, and was the same pack that when we sat down with Joe, Nigel and the team to clear the audit with management on the 8th of August that we had there. So it hopefully tells the story of the audit and highlights the key areas that we've discussed as when we've been finalising our findings. What I suggest doing today is just very briefly take you through the first section of the report, which is the exec summary, really. So starting on page 1 of the report, so 68 of the pack, I think the key area there is just to pass on thanks to Nigel and Joe and the team for their help in completing the audit. Our being able to complete the audit is subject to us having unrestricted access to the books and records of the organisation, and also to receiving all the explanations, satisfactory explanations that we need for our queries. I'd just like to point out that we had unrestricted access to all the information that we needed, so performed our work in accordance with the plan. On page 2 of the pack, this is really sort of like the logistics part of the audit. It's the project management plan really as we move through. As you'd expect today, you can see there's no matters outstanding, our work is complete. Subject to discussions today, we were therefore in the position to be able to sign the audit report as of today. And section 1.2 of the report just notes that we didn't have to modify our approach. So when we last met and we presented the audit service plan to you, which highlighted the approach that we were going to take for the audit, we were able to complete our work in accordance with that plan. Okay, and there's a lot of information on page 3 of the pack, but if I just summarise this, because this is really the key findings of the audit, which are explained in detail in the appendices. When we met and went through the audit service plan, we highlighted the risks at the planning stage that we were focusing on from an audit perspective. You may well remember that 2 of those related to fraud risks. So there was the risk management overriding control and the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Both of those risks are required to be significant risks on all of the audits that we perform. And that's the international standards on auditing that dictate that. So that's not a risk assessment that's made to Mercia Energy per se. It's a standard risk that we have on all of our audits. The risk of fraud in any organisation is always significant. Clearly, the organisation has a suite of internal controls that are in place, and they provide the committee with assurance that the transactions flow through the system as they should. There are ways to override those controls, and particularly in a relatively small team, people have the ability to override those controls personally. So we're very much aware of that risk, and we look for large, unusual transactions that could be indicative of fraud taking place, or potentially transactions that could take place to disguise a fraud. So we look for large, unusual items in the cash book. We look at manual journal entries, for example. All of that work was completed with no findings to report. In terms of revenue recognition as well, generally where frauds take place, it's quite often hidden within revenue. There's a large number of the accounts, it's the easiest place to hide these things. So again, we look at all manual journal entries that are posted to revenue, and any unusual transactions that go through the revenue nominal codes. Again, nothing to report back to you in terms of our findings there. They were the 2 significant risks that we presented to you at the planning stage. We also had an elevated risk, which was in relation to going concern. It's been a volatile year for all, well, volatile period really for all businesses and organisations over the last 2 or 3 years. And again, going concern is a regular elevated risk on the audits that we perform just because of that. In relation to West Mercia Energy, we principally reviewed management's own assessment of going concern. So as part of our work, management present to us their assessment of going concern. And that really looks at 2 aspects. There's 2 key aspects in relation to going concern for the accounts. One, is it the correct basis of preparation? And 2, if it is the correct basis of preparation, are there any material uncertainties in relation to going concern that should be disclosed in the accounts? Management's paper basically looks at forecasts. Going concern is the one prospective part of our audit. Most of it's retrospective, looking at the historic transactions in the accounts. Going concern is prospective insofar as it relates to the organisation's ability to meet its liabilities as they fall due for the next 12 months from the date of signing. So really through to the end of September of next year, as we sit here today. The key aspect of the paper is therefore in relation to the forecasts and post-year-end trading after the date of the accounts. Management have done a detailed forecast. They've also highlighted the key assumptions that form part of those forecasts. and as part of that have then done a sensitivity analysis saying, okay, if we take a pessimistic, a realistic and an optimistic view on some of these assumptions, where do those forecasts take us? We reviewed those. We can see that even on a pessimistic assumption basis, those scenarios are still viable. We therefore are in agreement with management's decision to prepare the accounts on a going concern basis, and we're not aware of any material uncertainties that need to be disclosed within the accounts. Okay, in terms of other matters that were discussed during the course of the audit, we didn't necessarily highlight at the planning stage of the audit. That's the next 3 bullet points on slide 3. The current performance update and business plan really links into what we've just discussed in relation to going concern. We also, aware of the volatility again in terms of the market, looked at contracted positions, particularly from an accounting perspective, as to whether or not there are any potential loss-making contracts with customers. The implication being that if there are, they need to be provided in full in the accounts. We weren't aware of any. The final bullet point on there relates to the distribution, particularly the timing of the distribution. Because it was deferred, it's distribution in relation to 2021 that was paid in June 2022. Because of the way you have to account for distributions, and you account for them at the time that they're made, as opposed to in the year that they relate, we just clarified that position, and the distributions therefore disclosed as a post-balance sheet event in the account, as opposed to being accounted for within the income and expenditure statement. Moving on from there, just slide 4 is a summary of just some of the other areas that we've discussed. Key estimates are an important part of any audit. The vast majority of transactions that make up the accounts are actually settled or closed transactions. They're very factual. The areas where the accounts could potentially be manipulated, if the desire was there to do so, are around estimates. And therefore, from an audit perspective, we have to be sceptical of the estimates that are made and challenge those. Really, from an estimates perspective, there's relatively few in the accounts. Where they do come through is around the pension assumptions, it's around any doubtful debt provisions, and it's around any estimates that are made within accruals. So we ensured that we reviewed those in detail, and again, there's no adverse findings in relation to those. Accounting policies, that's just really to report that there's no changes in accounting policies during the year. So no changes to the accounting standards, no changes to the CIPFA code. So the accounts for 2021-2022 have been prepared on a consistent basis with the prior year. Related parties, the related party transactions are always a sensitive part of any audit. They're actually audited to a lower materiality than the rest of the accounts, just because of the sensitivity around them. Related party transactions, as they stand, are with member authorities, as you'd expect, and they're disclosed in note 10 of the accounts. Finally, on page 4, laws and regulations. Again, this is an area of heightened focus in recent years for audits. As we enter a more regulated environment and a more litigious society, we have to be aware of any potential breaches in regulations or litigation against the organisation that could require a material provision in the accounts. We've made appropriate inquiries and aren't aware of any that aren't accounted for in the statement of accounts. Just turning the page then on to page 5 of our report. This is, there's not much that's said on this page, but that should be taken as a positive, really, because really this is the page that we record any of our adjustments that come out of the audit. So any of the errors that we find in the numbers and propose them for adjustment. It's also when we report on any significant deficiencies in internal controls that we become aware of during the course of the audit. As you'll note on that page, that there's no adjustments to report and there's no significant control deficiencies to note either, which I think is quite an unusual position to be in from all of the audits that we do across the year, and is a good reflection really of the control environment of the organisation and the quality of the accounting records that are presented to us for audit. Page 6 goes into a bit more detail in terms of some of those assumptions around going concern, but I think we've touched on those. So the last page I really wanted to run through was just for section 4. The section 4.1 management representation, which James has already mentioned, that's just the letter that we're required to be signed by the committee alongside the accounts. There's no unusual paragraphs in that. It's very standard just in terms of making sure that, or providing representation that all the information is being provided to us as part of our audit. 4.2 subsequent events, we need to consider those right up to the date of signing. So to today, the only one that we're aware of, as we've mentioned, is the distribution that was paid in June. There's no other subsequent events in the accounts. So again, it's a bit of an opportunity today. If there are any that you're aware of that aren't in the accounts, now would be the moment to say so. But otherwise, subject to there not being any, final piece for me really is just to confirm that the audit report on the accounts is unqualified, it's unmodified, and we've also reassessed our position from an independence perspective as of today, and I'm happy that we can issue our audit report as independent auditors to the joint committee. So those are the key areas of the report I wanted to highlight, but happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, John. Do you have any questions or comments? Let's start online. Willem, I think there's only you now. No? Adrian?
No, I mean, obviously having a clean audit is, a great reassurance to us, and so well done to the auditors, and thank you very much indeed for doing your work on time, which is pretty unusual at the moment in local government. So thank you very much indeed, and thanks very much indeed to Nigel and the team. Because I've been on this committee long enough to remember there were 7 years where we didn't actually manage to get an audit opinion.
Wow. Thank you. Yes, congratulations, and thank you, John. That was a very clear presentation. So the recommendation is that we endorse the audit findings and report presented. I'm happy to do that.
Seconded. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Shall we move on to item 8, or shall we hold back on that? Shall we? We'll move on to item 8 then, the internal audit.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So this is the internal audit report for, again, year ending 31st of March 22. I think what you'll find is it very much reiterates what you really just heard from the external audit about the standard, the control environment, and about the work that Nigel and his team have actually put in. So it confirms that the head of audit's end of year opinion on the internal control environment is substantial. And just to confirm to the board that whilst it uses the word substantial, that is the highest level we can actually give in terms of an internal audit opinion. So across the year, we completed 4 audits. 3 of them we gave good assurance for, and 1 reasonable assurance, where I can confirm to the auditors that there were no significant or fundamental recommendations made. There were minor required attention to best practice recommendations made, of which we've had positive management assurance that those will be adopted. Other than that, really, it's just a case of saying, yeah, thank you very much to Nigel and his team for making the internal audit work so easy, for allowing us to actually undertake work in an efficient manner. And if you've got any questions, I'm quite happy to take those on the reports.
Thank you. Willem, I'll start with you again. Perfect. Adrian?
I don't have anything to raise, which is a bit unusual.
That's a good thing. Excellent. Thank you to the team for carrying out the audit. Well done to the team for having such a good audit, internal audit. So, therefore, looking at the recommendations under item 3, A to C, are we happy to endorse those? Yeah.
Agreed, Kevin.
Okay. Item 9 then is distribution of surplus. James, I think this is you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the distribution of surplus paper is set out at item 9. There were 2 recommendations relating to the retention of an accumulated surplus of £0.89 million, and then a distribution of 0.396 million to the owning authorities. Section 4 sets out the general fund balance as at the 1st of April, which was just over £1.8 million. And from that was deducted then the 2021 distribution, which was referred to in an earlier paper, which was paid out in June 2022 for £576,000. The balance then is split between a retention of surplus and a distribution. So in section 6, we have the breakdown of the retention of the surplus. So the capital at risk is estimated at £790,000, and then a general retention of £100,000, leaving £890,000, which then leaves the £396,000 as the distribution level. In section 7, the breakdown of that distribution using the formula that's been adopted is set out in table 3, and the values there for each of the owning authorities are shown. It's proposed that these amounts will be paid in October of this year. I have a question.
So the proposal, based on what we agreed last year, in fact, with the new model. So Willem, do you have any questions, any comments, Adrian? No?
Straightforward.
Absolutely. So the recommendations are at point 2 of the report. Are we happy to approve those?
Agreed, Chairman.
Yeah. Thank you. Nice and painless.
Receiving money always is.
Well, we have known other times. So moving on to item 10, risk management update.
Thank you, Chair. In accordance with our risk management policy that's been presented and agreed by the Joint Committee before, I'm obliged to bring to this committee any medium and high risks in line with our strategy. Moving on to page 90, those are detailed under paragraph 5.4. We keep our risk register under constant review. Currently, we've identified 83 risks. Most of those are operational. There's controls in place to bring them down to an acceptable risk level. However, 7 remain as medium or high, and those are details in the paragraph 5.4. Just to raise some detail around some of those. The first 3 really are linked to the unusual conditions in the markets we're seeing at this point. The first one is relating to market conditions leading to less competitive prices or year-on-year price increases. Well, at this point, our managed positions are very competitive against the market. But moving on to next year, they will be giving rise to increases, unfortunately, but much lower than they would have been had a customer not been under our arrangements. So that's really number 1. Number 2, those impacts are even more so for those customers that have delayed renewing or extending contracts. So we're in, pleasingly, most of those cracked on this year, last year, and signed up very early. But 1 or 2 have had some delays. Whether they're protected by the government energy bill release scheme from April, time will tell. Risk of breaching trading risk levels, that's really as a result of if the supplier proposes or pushes a reforecast of volumes for later this year. At this point, they haven't, and we're monitoring our volumes very closely, and we believe they're at the levels they should be. And so if there was a suggestion of a reforecast, we would certainly put up some challenges to that. But there is that risk remaining within the model. In terms of loss of key staff, that's being highlighted as a medium risk. We have reduced the overall status, but we've remained as a medium risk. We have brought in 3 new members of staff, Lee being one of those, and we're close to bringing a 4th one in, which is a shared IT post with Shropshire to work alongside our IT managers, so we hope to get that person on board shortly. So we've done quite a lot over the last 6 months to mitigate the risk of loss of key staff, and you can see with more faces who come to the committee than perhaps there were a couple of years ago. In terms of bad debts, the risk of bad debts or delayed payment, we've elevated that risk up due to the increase in energy prices. Also, some customers have converted from procurement only, where we don't pay bills and charge on, to fully managed. And we've been keeping a close eye on those two local authorities. One's paid via direct debits, there's no problems at all. The other one is a large authority. There's been some delays, which we kind of expected, be it they're a couple of weeks behind, and we're in ongoing discussions to mitigate those delays even more. So it hasn't caused us any major issues to date, but we're keeping a very close eye on that authority in question. So, and then moving forward, our turnover will increase for 23-24. So, whilst we're supporting customers, and they're not going to be seeing the rises they would do at market rates, they will be seeing rises all the same, substantial. So we are having more focus on our credit control, which has been excellent to date. And if we need to bring any more part-time resource or whatever on the credit control, we will do so. We highlighted 6 months ago the increased risk of dealing with suppliers that got ownership or investments in Russia or Belarus. The particular one in question was Gazprom, and they were on our dynamic purchasing system for fixed. They've now been removed. And there was very little going through that arrangement anyway. Pleasingly, I've highlighted three risks that were deemed to be higher last time reported, and that those risk levels have reduced. So the one risk was about the risk that we would not be competitive against the market within the year. Well, we're very competitive within the year. And that was highlighted back in March, just in case there's a quick sharp drop in market prices. We haven't seen that, quite the opposite really. But cash out was a particular concern last time when we moved to a different product. And the risk has changed really, that's gone, but the risk of a reforecast, as I mentioned before, is in there. And the final one, through discussions last time, we remember there was the imminent, the risk had happened really of a member authority taking some of their contracts away to a alternative energy provider. So there's not been any further talk regarding that. So as a result, I've reduced that risk down, but keeping a watchful eye on it. So that's it, Chair, really. That's all the risks as we see them that warrant reporting to the committee. Happy to take any questions.
Very good, thank you.
Just a quick one for you, Nigel. You say that the risk of the market dropping very suddenly is gone. Well, that isn't what you said. You said you managed it in March, to be fair to you. Because I was going to say, the market yesterday, your oil dropped nearly $8 a barrel out of the blue. So I was going to say, I don't think that's gone away this year, but we're still fully locked at such a low level compared to the market. It probably isn't a worry, but might be the year after.
Yes, fair point. I think the risks were greater in March because we're not even in the start of full financial year. So now we're 6 months in. Our market advantage has increased. So even if it crashed, say in December or Q1 next year, we've had such a lot of protection for customers up to that point. I think the risks are, as you progress through the financial year, the risks become lower. But the risks then move on to the new financial year. So I could be bringing that back as a higher risk in. Yeah. There's a good chance I can bring that as an elevated risk back in the next committee.
Will, have you got any thoughts, comments? Thank you. So we have a recommendation at point 2 where we are asked to consider and endorse with appropriate comments the agenda that I was presented to us. Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 11 is standing orders, and we are asked to approve the updated standing orders which were attached. Just talking to, anybody want to speak to this? Sorry, Nigel, it's you.
Yeah, this is pretty big paper, Chair. So the last time the standing orders were brought to committee was back in 2016. So some time ago, and through work of the internal audit, they did highlight one particular clause which stated if there was something missing from our standing orders, then we would fall onto the standing orders of Shropshire's. The challenge was for us, unless you know Shropshire's standing orders in depth, you don't know what's missing. So we conducted a review of those standing orders and brought in anything we felt would enhance and complement our standing orders and make sure there wasn't any gaps. We've done that work with support from Shropshire's legal support, and they've also been reviewed by Nigel Denton, who's attended this committee for a number of years, just to make sure they're in accordance. I've highlighted some of the key changes in 5.5. Happy to take any questions, but propose that these new standing orders are adopted. Sure.
I'm good with them. William, any thoughts, comments? Adrian?
Just a slightly point of information for me. Procurement regulation thresholds, they still remain at the EU level of 150. I probably can't remember what the figure is, but let's try 156,000.
I believe so, Chair. It's reflected in the documents, yeah.
Right.
And they're reviewed regularly.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Are we happy then to approve the updated standing orders?
Agreed, Chairman.
Thank you. And that's therefore.
I just need to go up to item 5.
Oh yes. We do have time, so if we can go back to item 5, which is the supplier contracts update, I think, from.
Actually, Chair, there's nothing to report this time. It's a straightforward one.
Excellent. I'm glad we waited. So that does in fact bring the meeting to a close, the public meeting. Okay.
In order to send the live session.
Chairman, do you want me to move that we move into exempt?
Yes, I do.
If I can duly move that we